Do you not like reading? Do you absolutely despise wanting to walk someplace only for random monsters to get in your way? Do you absolutely hate having long playtimes and value in your games? Well, I'm here to tell you that things don't have to be this way. I'm Square Enix, here to tell you that RPGs can be for everyone. Not every RPG is a complete slog, and to think so is biased. So please, buy my games. Please. Please. Anyway, now here's LumiRev, resident internet funny man, to tell you how anyone could get into RPGs.
Thank you, Faceless Corporation. Video games have been a favorite pastime for many over the years, yet there has been one genre that's always been divisive among the gaming community: role-playing games, or RPGs. They're typically known for having a sense of progression through leveling up, as well as exploration, a strong narrative focus, and turn-based combat. However, they're also known for grinding, a slow start, and extremely long playtimes. There are many fans who love RPGs, insisting that some of the best video game experiences they've had were playing them, while there are others that denounce RPGs for taking too long to be fun, getting stale, and forcing story down their throats when they just want to have fun after a long day of work. As you can tell, I lie in the former category, and naturally, I want more people to be able to understand my love for these experiences. But why do people get so turned off by these flaws when there are others that don't mind them? Well, before we get to that, have you subscribed to the channel yet? Over 85% of you aren't subscribed, so please do it so I can make more content. Now, as for why RPGs are so divisive, I have a theory. I believe that there's a spectrum defined by people's preference and tolerance when playing games. Everyone is on this graph. There are two axes, with the X being short to long playtimes and the Y being gameplay focus to narrative focus. In the lower left, short in gameplay, you'll typically find players that don't particularly care how expensive or short the game is as long as they have a good time. They actually prefer games that are shorter in nature so that they can immediately play the next one. We'll call this quadrant the Devourers, as they want to experience as much as possible. Genres for these people include platformers, collectathons, and the most recent AAA titles. In the lower right, long in gameplay, you'll find gamers that typically want to play a game for a long time without having to read the text box. We'll call these players the competitors, as this category is filled with fighting games, battle royale games, and strategy games. In the upper left, we have short and narrative. We'll call these gamers the Economists, as they typically purchase a lot of indie games, typically Metroidvanias, horror games, and action RPGs, games that have underlying lore yet are condensed in nature. And in the upper right, we have long and narrative. We'll call this category the Investors, as they typically play a lot of RPGs and visual novels. They want to put their all into playing this one game and get a worthwhile emotional experience out of it. Of course, there are games that lie between these categories as well, but I'm not going to get into that. Naturally, gamers who prefer a certain category will usually play a little bit of the two surrounding categories, but will actively avoid the one that is opposite of their own. And of course, the extent that a person is willing to play other games marks where a person is on this chart. Let's call this factor tolerance. The higher a person's tolerance and ability to see past the faults of other games, the more towards the center of the chart they are. We'll call this center gaming enlightenment, because I think that's funny. The lower a person's tolerance or greater their preferences, the farther they will be towards the outskirts of the chart. And naturally, there are some game genres that a player just won't like at all, outliers in the data. But generally, every gamer is somewhere on this chart. But what happens is that players in this lower left category, the Devourers, will actively avoid RPGs which are on the opposite end of the chart. And I want to show that there are many RPGs that can appeal to these kinds of people and give kind of a flowchart for those who have always wanted to get into RPGs but just can't. So let's start with what I think is the perfect RPG for anyone to get into, no matter what age or background they have with video games. Yes, this game is popular, and most likely you've already played it. But I want to discuss what makes this game so easy to get into and why nearly everyone can enjoy it. Undertale is a game in which a child falls into a hole in the ground and wakes up in a cave of monsters that was sealed by humanity centuries ago. But you don't even need to know that. This cutscene plays on the title screen, but you can just skip it. You meet Flowey, who you get into a battle with, showing you how it works. The game starts fast, which addresses a common complaint, so we'll cross that off our list of grievances. It's a combination of turn-based battle systems and bullet hell games, with you attacking an enemy or doing an action to appease them, and then you have to avoid their attacks. This addresses another common complaint with RPGs in that waiting for your opponent to attack and having to wait for your own turn is boring and uninteresting. But with this, you have to be involved and actively try to influence the battle with your own actions, keeping the player invested and preventing them from getting bored. While there are random encounters, you can always choose to just run away with no repercussions since you never even need to level up in the game in order to beat it. not even once. Throughout your adventure, you meet many characters with distinct and lovable personalities, and jokes and japes are abound. All the NPCs are charming, and you can tell what the world is like as you go through. There are many different locales, all with jamming music that truly accentuates the experience. The bullet patterns and battles continue to get more intense as well, and difficulty ramps up before anything gets too stale. On average, the game takes only 6 to 7 hours to be in your first playthrough, assuming you don't know what you're doing, where you then have the option to play through the game again in order to get different endings. The endings depend on how many monsters you've killed and how many you've saved over the course of the journey. The 3 main endings in total will most likely take you around 15 hours to beat. Undertale is essentially the perfect starting RPG, lying right in the middle of this graph. It's hard to find a person that doesn't like Undertale. You can pick it up when you want and stop when you want and still have a fulfilling experience even if you only decide to get one of the endings. After you play Undertale, there are 3 main routes I would recommend based on where you consider yourself to be a Devourer, Economist, or a competitor. If you're a Devourer, I would recommend you move to Paper Mario 1 or 2. Paper Mario is different than most RPGs due to its combination of action and turn-based mechanics. You and your opponent take turns fighting, yes, but you have the option to strengthen each attack by timing command inputs with the attacks you have. You get to customize your build by equipping badges, allowing you to use new moves, afflict status effects in combat, raise certain stats, and more. When you level up, you get to select to upgrade HP, FP, or BP, health points, flower points, and badge points, respectively, letting you customize even further. If you want to be tanky, go with HP. If you want to use a lot of special moves, do FP. If you want to equip more badges, do BP. But I would recommend intentionally limiting how much BP you gain, as it makes you incredibly overpowered if you max it out. You also get partners that you can use in combat that have their own specialties and let you adapt to the situation. They all have their unique attack commands and have their own pros and cons. They can be upgraded as well, letting you use even more moves. The amount of options you have in battle is staggering, but not overbearing when you actually use it. In fact, you can just choose not to go into battle at all, as you can just avoid enemies in the overworld. No random encounters here. In fact, I would encourage it when you feel that things are getting too easy. In Paper Mario 2, the overworld itself is large, but linear in nature as you center around the hub world of Rogueport, a town full of misfits and seedy dealings. You go around and collect the crystal stars in order to open the thousand-year door to claim the treasure inside. But all the locations you see are really interesting for a Mario game. I especially like the Glitz Pit and the Creepy Steeple. But on the topic of the Creepy Steeple, know that this game is not without faults. There tends to be a lot of backtracking in chapters 4 and 7, so be warned and try not to judge the game too harshly for that. But everything else in this game is genuinely top-notch, with all the characters you meet being genuinely funny and charming, and the story, while simple, hits all the spots it needs to. But if the backtracking and downtime is a big factor to you, then I would recommend playing Paper Mario 64 instead, as there's much less backtracking but has a bit slower start and less creative locales in my personal opinion. You still get the same core gameplay experience, but it feels much less refined in its execution. One factor that might persuade you to choose between the games would be playtime, as 64 is roughly 20 to 25 hours in length, while you can expect Paper Mario 2 to be 30 hours in length. But overall, you can't really go wrong with either of them. You know what? Screw it. Go ahead and try any Mario & Luigi game, or Super Mario RPG while you're at it. They're all good. Except Paper Jam. Fuck you, Paper Jam. The next RPG that should be on your list is Mother 3. While some may disagree with this decision, as Mother 3 has a heavy focus on story, I would argue that the majority of your time is spent in-game and the merits in its battle system far outweigh those concerns. In Mother 3, you take control over numerous characters throughout the story as you tackle themes of loss, modernization, and human greed. While the game may have a 3 in it, Mother 3 doesn't have much relevance to the preceding titles, and you don't need to understand the events of the previous 2 in order to enjoy Mother 3. The gameplay seems basic on the surface. You have up to 4 party members fighting against foes in your standard turn-based battle. But what makes the combat great is the ticking HP and the rhythm-timed hits. When an enemy hits you, your HP slowly ticks down until it reaches the amount of HP it's supposed to be. However, if you heal when it's ticking down, it will instantly go back up, allowing you to save yourself from death. It forces you to rush some of your decisions and encourages fast-paced battles despite them being turn-based. As a result, this game also tends to have a lot more challenge compared to previous RPGs as you feel a lot more of these close calls in battle. However, the pacing doesn't require you to grind. It feels challenging, but as long as you engage in some battles on the way to the next objective, you'll never be under-leveled. You can actively choose to avoid enemies in the overworld as there are no random encounters as well. In fact, if you're leveled high enough, you won't even have to worry about them as you can just dash straight through the enemy and beat them instantly. The other battle mechanic is rhythm-timed hits. When you attack an enemy, if you press A along with a beat in the music, you'll deal extra damage in a row. It doesn't add that much damage after the first 8 hits, but it helps you stay involved with the gameplay even if you're just mashing the attack button. Outside of battle, you'll see a lot of similarities to Undertale in its world, which is understandable since Undertale was heavily influenced by the mother franchise. There are plenty quirky characters, charm oozing out their edges, and a surprising amount of dark themes and moments that really make this game stand out. But I'm not going to talk about any of those, you'll just have to experience the game for yourself. Layer 3 sits at a comfortable 25 hours in playtime as well, so it shouldn't be that rough for any Devourers out there. But I should acknowledge that this game was only released in Japan and requires a fan translation to play. But you should be able to find out how to play it easily with a quick Google search, wink wink nudge nudge. Moving on to the next branch of the Flowchart, for those of you that are competitors and like to get a lot of value out of your games, I would like to direct your attention to Skyrim. Skyrim differs from many traditional RPGs in a few key ways. For one, it's an action RPG, meaning there is no turn-based combat. You run around with your favorite weapon of choice and press buttons to beat the shit out of passing monsters, all while leveling up and investing your points into new skills. This game's all about customization and playing how you want to play. Do you want to go into dungeons and get new loot to deck yourself out with? Sure, you can do that. Do you want to explore every hilltop just to see what's there? Sure, go nuts. Do you just want to speed through to the end of the game and ignore all the side content? Fuck it, why not? Go ahead, wield that giant greatsword, be a dual magic caster, mess around with the dumb NPC AI. The world is your oyster, but remember that the world can bite back if you screw around too much. You can even choose to avoid combat and just spend your time crafting new armor, weapons, and trying out alchemy. However, since this game has so much choice built into it, it's only natural that the game sometimes doesn't know what to do with what's given, so there will be glitches no matter how you play through the game. Wouldn't be a Bethesda game without it. For those of you that want to do a few side quests and focus on the main story, you can pick up the remastered version of Skyrim and expect roughly 25 hours in playtime, but for those of you that really want to sink your teeth into the game, expect a 100 plus hour experience. Next, you should try The Witcher 3. Now, Witcher 3 is basically Skyrim, but on steroids in every aspect of the game. The characters are more well written, the world is larger, the gameplay is deeper, the story is more fleshed out, and the playtime has been extended to a meaty 50 hours in main story. However, it does have some flaws in that you are required to do some side quests in order to get to the level required to get to the main story. Some of these quests do get repetitive over time, but it never gets flat out boring. After all, you can just choose to screw off and explore the massive world at your leisure, and then come back when you feel like you're ready to continue with the story. The world itself is full of interesting locations, plenty of unique monsters, and lots of things that you can do that actually affect the world and the outcome. While most of these RPGs tend to create the illusion of choice by giving you dialogue options that inevitably all meet up eventually, The Witcher 3 doesn't hesitate to actually take you down branching paths. The story itself may seem confusing at first since you're jumping on the third game, but don't worry too much as you'll understand the gist of it within the first few hours. After all, not even people who played the first two Witcher games really know what's going on. The combat is diverse and much more fast-paced than Skyrim, as you're given the ability to parry, dodge, and vary the strength and speed of your attacks. While simple, it's incredibly fun to dash around the battlefield and cut down foes with your superior movement. It's fast-paced and much more engaging than your typical RPG. The attack patterns of the enemies constantly vary, forcing you to adapt to each situation and think on your feet. It truly takes the strengths of Skyrim and improves on them in every sense of the word. However, it also improves on its faults. The Witcher 3 has so much customization it can be considered overbearing. The alchemy menu is confusing for first-time players, and the ways you can improve Geralt's skills and weapons vary vastly, to the point where it feels like trying to pick an ice cream flavor out of 200 possible flavors. However, if you played Skyrim first, you should be much better able to adapt to this with your prior experience. Now, for the Economists, let me show you some RPGs with a narrative that gets right into the action. Chrono Trigger. In Chrono Trigger, you travel across time to save the world from a worldwide disaster, as well as fix any mistakes in the timeline there may be along the way. As a result, there are 13 different endings that you can end up depending on what you do. You meet so many different characters across time, and the character development is truly something else for a Super Nintendo game. The sprites and backgrounds look absolutely gorgeous and timeless compared to many other RPGs. Because the game takes place over so many different eras, there are a number of locales and places with their own unique identity. You never know where or when you're going to end up next, or even what happens at the end, but each ending does feel satisfying in some sense. As for the gameplay, you immediately enter battle upon encountering an enemy. No screen transitions or anything, you're just in there, which is greatly appreciated since it doesn't break immersion with this battle transition or force you to wait at all. You can choose between turn-based combat and active time-based combat, in which each character has a meter that builds up over time. When that meter is full, you can do an action. For those of you that like the immersion of an actual battle, this mode is for you. As the characters level up, they unlock attacks, which are basically skills and magic rolled into one. But what's insane is the fact that you can combine techs with your fellow party members to create all new unique attacks. You're encouraged to try all these new combinations to see what works, and it makes these battles really engaging. With the amount of party members you gain and the amount of attacks you can learn, battles never really feel old, especially when the game only takes a bit over 20 hours to beat. Actually, if you feel like you haven't learned enough about the characters or story, or if you regret the ending you got, you can always just do a New Game Plus run and just avoid all the skippable enemies. And if you get tired of playing and just want some ending, you can just choose to fight the final boss before you finish the main story, similar to Breath of the Wild. Chrono Trigger gives you a lot of options in how you play it, and I fully endorse it. Next on the list is Final Fantasy VII, and not the remake, but the original. I know, it's not a short game. You're right, it's gonna take you roughly 35 hours. That is, if you play the original version. The version I think you should play is the PS4, Xbox One, Windows 10, and Switch re-release. This version allows you to speed up combat by 3 times, turn off random encounters, and adds many other quality of life changes that remove a lot of the problems that FF7 originally had. If you utilize these features, your playtime should cut down to 25 to 30 hours. While there are many others that think Final Fantasy VI and IX are superior, I don't think either of those games are as approachable as FF7 is. In FF7, you play as Cloud Strife, a mercenary who used to be in a unit known as Soldier, warriors who were modified by the Shinra Corporation by injecting Mako into them, which is the planet's lifeblood. He's hired by the eco-terrorist group Avalanche to take down one of the reactors in the city of Midgar, and ultimately ends up going on this journey to save the world from the evil Sephiroth. FF7 was the first entry in the series to really depart from the fantasy setting, and is definitely a nice change of pace due to this. Exploring the world is fun because you never know whether you're going to end up in this dystopian modernized city or the standard fantasy town due to being outside the reaches of Shinra. FF7's combat is pretty similar to Chrono Trigger's in that it also uses the active time battle system with the option to switch to turn-based combat. However, this time, you don't have techs, but materia. Materia is basically these magic spheres that you can equip that give you skills or magic or whatever. That means you can customize every character however you want by equipping them materia, and the more materia is used in battle, the higher level the spell or skill becomes. As a result, this game offers more customization than Chrono Trigger in how you approach its combat. There are a bunch of side quests that you can do to extend the playtime, including minigames and optional boss fights, which often lead to better materia and gaining summoned materia, which let you unleash a devastating attack. But of course, the focus of this game is on its narrative and characters, especially for Cloud. When you jump on this train, you're on for the ride of your life, baby. Some of you may want to play the remake instead of the original, but I would highly advise against it. First of all, the game only covers the Midgar section of the original game, and as a result, the game is incredibly slow-paced and is much harder to start as a newcomer. Not only that, but there are changes present in the game that only make sense if you played the original, which leave you with a sense of dissatisfaction if you don't. The remake was pretty much made for fans to get something new out of the story of FF7. Once you play the original and watch the Advent Children complete movie, then I would advise playing the remake, as I do believe the remake is incredibly good. It's just not that welcoming to newcomers. Now that we've discussed all the paths, I will reveal the secret behind this flowchart. For the Devour path, you'll be shocked to find that this path was Nintendo RPGs all along! Yes, many Devourers can and do enjoy RPGs made by Nintendo, as they typically have shorter runtimes, less focus on narrative, and some sort of interactive element that makes battles more fun. For the competitor path, it was actually Western RPGs. These usually have a much higher focus on exploration and action-based combat rather than turn-based. As a result, these games are much more approachable for those that want to keep playing a game but don't like reading. And for those of you who are economists, know that you are secretly playing Square Enix RPGs. While Chrono Trigger and FF7 are not as narrative-heavy and boring as many other JRPGs are, they still have a lot of the central mechanics of a JRPG. Lots of narrative, lots of text boxes, and an emphasis on turn-based or ATB combat. It's like a light version of a traditional JRPG seen by many of the other Final Fantasy entries or the Tales series. If you enjoyed a particular path, know that you can find more RPGs like that just by looking up that category or developer of the RPG. Not all RPGs have to be slogfests full of grinding and text box mashing. They have variants, and nearly anyone can find their own niche within the genre. There are many other RPGs which I haven't mentioned that people love because they're so different. Golden Sun, Persona 5 Royal, Octopath Traveler, Oblivion, Dragon Quest XI's, Ni no Kuni, Tales of Berseria, Yakuza, Like a Dragon, Disgaea 5, the list goes on, and I would personally recommend all of these. But there is one more game which I would recommend you undergo as your quote-unquote final exam. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. If you can play this RPG, you can play anything. It's my personal favorite game, but it has all the boons and all the flaws of the RPG genre. It has a slow start, it doesn't immediately click, but the narrative is amazing, the gameplay is interactive, strategic, and incredibly fun, there are no random encounters, the scale of the world is nuts, the party customization is off the chain, but there are high-level monsters also roaming around. Skipping the narrative or forgetting it results in you not knowing what to do. The playtime is 50 hours without side quests, and the amount of content can be paralyzing since there's so many options. This game is the epitome of a roller coaster. Your level of tolerance will pretty much determine whether this is your favorite game of all time or if you swear off RPGs forever. but generally, most people that stick with this game have one moment in which everything clicks and you're suddenly fully invested in this game. For me, this was around the 6 to 8 hour mark where I arrived at Storal Marsh and it turned nighttime. That experience was truly magical and I couldn't put the controller down. Like, I physically could not put the controller down. I didn't show up for school. My life was spiraling out of control. I was kicked out of the house. I was starving on the corner of the street, but I still had my Switch in Xenoblade Chronicles. So, let's go over it in detail. In Xenoblade, there were two titans, the Mechonis and the Bionis, who were fighting over an endless sea until they eventually killed each other. Life sprung anew on their corpses, with the protagonist Shulk growing up on Colony 9 of the Bionis' calf. The mechanical beings of Mechonis, the Mechon, end up attacking the Bionis, leading Shulk to journey to the Mechonis on a quest for revenge. The story is simple at first, but it ends up being more about the journey rather than the destination, as you encounter many different species and civilizations across the Bionis, before you find out that it wasn't in fact about the destination all along, as the story suddenly handles revenge in a much more classy manner than you would expect, unlike a certain other revenge-centric story that may or may not have released in 2020. Shitty sequel. The combat is similar to that of an MMO, in which you have a hotbar of skills that you can perform that cool down over time. When you're not using skills, your character will auto-attack to deal damage. When certain skills are used in a row, you can apply status effects, leading you to deal even more damage. Over time, you build up this gauge that when full allows you to perform a chain attack, which lets you stop time and manually control each character, letting you pick any skill to use without cooldown effects. If a party member goes down, you can revive them by using 1/3 of the gauge, offering this risk versus reward mechanic. It seems hard to understand at first, but since you're introduced to the characters when they have very few skills and slowly learn more as you go, it's easy to get into, but it doesn't truly feel satisfying until you have a full hotbar of skills and are making combos left and right. I could go on and on about it, but Xenoblade is much more deserving of its own video. Know that everyone has their own preferences, and their own preferences might not do well for certain kinds of RPGs, while they may be much more willing to play others. It all depends on what RPGs you play, and hopefully I was able to give you this guiding hand towards RPG games that you can enjoy even if you don't like them as a genre. Because I believe that saying you're just not an RPG guy is something that doesn't necessarily make sense when the types of RPGs differ so greatly that they have to have their own subcategories. Now, can you please let my family go?
Not very likely, sir. Why'd you promote Nintendo and Western RPGs? I thought we agreed on this. Square Enix RPGs only.
I'm sorry, I just can't do it. Even I get tired of turn-based combat, slow pacing, and strong narrative. I need a break. Please have mercy.
Mercy this, punk!
Thanks for watching till the end. Ow, I really appreciate it. Ow, and please subscribe. Ow, and buy Square Enix games. Ow, or my family will be executed. Ow, I'm sorry, Square, for not promoting Final Fantasy VII Remake more. Ow, I just thought it wasn't beginner friendly. Ow.
Quiet, you ruined my sales.
I'm sorry, please buy Final Fantasy VII Remake. Please.